Perfect.
Yeah, got it.
Okay. When it gets to 29 minutes past, I'll let you know, and then we can start letting people in, if that's all right.
Yeah, sounds good, Karen.
Yeah, so it's just turned 29 minutes past now, so I'm going to hide myself, mute myself. As soon as I do that, I'll start the webinar, so people will start coming in.
Just to let you know, the YouTube channel is Imperial Voice Media.
Okay,
thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to start now.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Regional History Centre MShed seminar for this evening. We're just waiting for people to join us in our virtual space and then we will crack on, but welcome to everybody. If you'd like to log in and say where you're coming from, just say hello in the chat. We do like to know where our audiences are dialing in from. And if you have any questions for our speakers this evening, please put those in the Q&A function as well, which should be available to you all. Hi Sheila, hi Iona, thank you for joining us. And hi Bunny as well. We'll just give it a few more moments before we start properly. It's only just gone 6:30 and I know it can weirdly take a bit of time to file into this virtual room. If you're just joining us, please do say hello in the chat and we'll leave the Q&A for the questions. Hello, David. Hi. Okay, well, it looks like our numbers are staying stable at the moment. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first of our new series of regional history seminars in conjunction with our wonderful colleagues at MShed. Thank you very much for joining us. And this evening, we are going to be joined by two colleagues who I'll introduce in a moment. We're really pleased to see you all here. As I said before, please put your questions in the Q&A function and do say hello in the chat. But now I'm going to hand over to my excellent colleague, Professor Sean Sobers, who's going to introduce this evening's speaker. Welcome, Sean.
Good evening. Thank you, Rose. Yeah, good evening, everyone. Thanks for all coming. It gives me great pleasure this evening to introduce our main speaker. I get to wear both hats. I get to wear my University of the West of England hat and my Fairfield House hat. I consider Ras Benji a friend and a colleague, and I've had the pleasure of witnessing his fantastic work that he's been doing at Fairfield House, which I'm sure we'll be hearing more about and seeing the fruits of in his research. Ras Benji is a Rastafari historian and researcher born in the UK and raised in the Southwest, but with roots in the Caribbean, Africa, China, and Europe. A healing journey of self-discovery under the guidance of the lessons of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie led Ras Benji to finding Fairfield House in Bath over 10 years ago and being involved in volunteering however possible, helping with raising funding, events, awareness, and working with the volunteers and elders and taking care of the garden in that space. And I do recommend, if you haven't been to Fairfield House before, Ras Benji runs incredible tours most Sundays, so do look out on our Facebook page and on our website for that information. Ras Benji obtained a legal education with a particular interest in international minority rights, and today he's an online business owner, a gardener, researcher, aspiring author, and with a main passion for promoting and defending the legacy of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I. So I'll hand over now to our main speaker and look forward to having questions and conversations afterwards. So over to you, Ras Benji. Give thanks.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the Bristol Museums and to the UWE Regional History Centre for inviting me to do this talk. Thank you also to Professor Sean Naphtali-Sobers for the introduction. I'm Ras Benji, and I'm a historian at Fairfield House, home of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I in Bath. I'm also one of the tour guides for our historical guided tours on Sundays throughout the year, so do come and check those out. I'd like to acknowledge first that it is the month of October, and that this is a very special month for us at Fairfield House and in the city of Bath. It's the month that Emperor Haile Selassie and his family and advisors and priesthood moved into the house in October 1936. It's also the month that the emperor returned once again to the city of Bath in 1954. And it was this very week that he was in Bath again, staying at Fairfield House on that last visit. This week in Bath, I was looking across the city from one of our hillsides, and it really struck me seeing the bright canopy of red, gold, and green and the autumn leaves in the beautiful sunshine, that even nature itself must have been flying the Ethiopian banner for Haile Selassie's return visit in the month of October. And of course, it's Black History Month, and we have many exciting events throughout the month at Fairfield House, including the visit of Marcus Garvey's son, Dr. Julius Garvey, tomorrow. But every month is Black History Month at Fairfield House, and we know that this subject and the many areas that are interwoven should be considered an essential part of world history 365 days a year. Today, we are going to go on a journey that is told in newspaper headlines, from the words of the emperor himself, those that were there, and some who are still here. Let's begin. In 1935, Mussolini was in charge of fascist Italy, and he invaded Ethiopia in an attempt to make a new Roman Empire. The attention of the world was on this conflict, and especially in Britain, anxiety about the war was strong after World War I, and the political feelings of the people were a hot topic. In 1935, there was what came to be known as the Peace Poll, and the League of Nations Union put a mass question to over half of the British public, millions of people. And the questions were eerily similar to the situation that was confronting the world, to what was unfolding in Ethiopia. Especially question 5. It said, do you consider that if a nation insists on attacking another, that other nations should combine to compel it to stop? A, by economic and non-military measures, or B, if necessary, military measures? The response from the British public was overwhelmingly in favor of the pure ideal of the League of Nations, which was collective security, but the League itself was unable to live up to that. And Haile Selassie, when Ethiopia was invaded, he made a dramatic mobilization proclamation to his nation, where everyone was conscripted. If you were able-bodied to fight back, join one of the armies to fight back against the invading Italians. And the emperor, he didn't discount himself from this process, and he fought personally back against the Italians on the battlefield. He often manned an anti-aircraft gun, as he's pictured there. And this was an account reported by his personal physician and his cousin, Dr. Malaku Bayen, in the Sunday Pictorial, an English newspaper in May 1936. He said, when it became apparent to the emperor he could do no more as a general, he fought as a simple soldier. Sword in hand, he rushed against the Italian ranks until some of us seized him and led him forcibly away. He ordered, commanded, pleaded with us to let him die on the field of battle, but we would not do it. We brought him safely away. And for those that are listening to the talk today, I'm going to read out some of the headlines that are on the slide in front. And it says, growing British concern, the trouble in Abyssinia. Abyssinia invaded, a sensational telegram from the Negus, an excitement in Geneva. Italy and Ethiopia prepare, and how to the two nations are mobilizing their forces. And the Negus, Haile Selassie, is to lead his troops. So this sets the context both regarding the mind state of the emperor, who did not imagine himself in exile, and of the British people who were out in their thousands to see him when he arrived in Britain in June 1936. He was the undoubted symbol of anti-fascism and of a united, free, independent Africa. Of course, this attention was very embarrassing for the British government, who were dead set at that time on appeasement of Mussolini's Italy. This was their strategy, trying to prevent the fascist alliance between Italy and Germany that would eventually happen. The emperor went to Switzerland to speak at the League of Nations and gave a famous prophetic address. And he warned, God and history will remember your judgment. Upon his return to Great Britain, someone very close to the emperor suggested that he visit Bath. And later in his life, Haile Selassie said to journalists that he will always consider this person to be a true friend. And on this slide in front of us, we have a headline that says, Haile Selassie saves Britain a dilemma. He's coming only as a private visitor. He addresses the League of Nations and gives a dramatic protest. And there's a handwritten note from Emperor Haile Selassie from the 4th of June, 1936, where he says, I wish to thank the English people for the very warm reception which greeted me on my arrival in England. In Bath, His Majesty visited the Roman baths. He admired the Palladian architecture, and he had treatment on mustard gas burns. And this was during a first 2-week holiday towards the end of August 1936. The emperor began to look at property whilst he was staying at the Bath Spa Hotel, and he visited Fairfield House with his party. And it was reported in the time in the newspapers that Fairfield was hidden behind thick hedges and tall walls. Fairfield is situated behind Partis College, which is a refuge for Christian women. So it was regarded as a quiet, private, religious corner of Bath. He bought Fairfield House for £3,500, and the family moved in on the 9th of October. The Emperor is the second and final private resident of Fairfield House after Mrs. Campbell White in the Victorian times. And I realized recently that there's lots of twos going on, because Fairfield House is 2 Kelston Road. It's exactly 2 miles to the center of Bath. And Emperor Haile Selassie was crowned on the 2nd of November, 1930. And it's the second time also that the Italians had tried to invade Ethiopia. And Fairfield House is an Italianate villa style property. So there was some irony to His Majesty taking up residence here whilst fighting back against the Italians and refusing to surrender his sovereignty. And some of the headlines that are in front of us: Emperor Haile Selassie holds court in Bath. Haile Selassie to pay visit to Bath. The Emperor may stay in the city. And a new house for Haile Selassie, which is the residence of the former Lady Mayor of Belfast. As the Emperor settled in to life in Bath, so did the dark reality of being isolated so far away from his country and his suffering people, and so far away also from the traditions and customs that the family were used to. And as we can see from the headlines in front of us, the Emperor was in great financial difficulty at Fairfield House. He was fighting legal battles to be recognized as the Emperor of Ethiopia, and he only had a limited amount of funds, and he was also supporting exiles all across the world from Ethiopia. So he was forced to sell his silver, and these are items that left Fairfield House and were auctioned and have since gone all across the world. The Emperor was suffering. It says here, Haile Selassie was sick in mind and body. And the Emperor was suffering from certainly depression. He was said to be often looking gravely sad, and also post-traumatic stress, most likely having been on the battlefield. And also, to make matters worse, Haile Selassie, it was reported, didn't have any books, which is not a situation which anyone wants to find themselves in. And in this article, with a vain hunt to find books for Haile Selassie, it described how the Emperor had exhaustively read all books that were in Fairfield House, and they were looking for more in the Ethiopian language. But although this time was very difficult, the Emperor did have love and support from the local people of Bath. And as we can see there, it says a headline, "Help for Haile Selassie. Postal orders, stamps, and tons of coal were arriving at Fairfield House." His Imperial Majesty's autobiography was written in Bath, and in it we learn about the very difficult time when the Emperor and his family were at total breaking point. And this was when there was a massacre in Addis Ababa by the Italians in February 1937. And from this, the Emperor, he wrote to Jerusalem, and he said that because it's so difficult, he must have the faith that they have of Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Orthodox faith at Fairfield House. So a chapel was set up in a large Victorian greenhouse, and it was here that the Emperor and Empress prayed daily for their country. The The emperor was reported in newspapers to always be standing during services in the greenhouse chapel, no matter how long they were. And the empress would always be covered from view when she prayed. They were totally sustained by their faith during this difficult time. And in this greenhouse chapel, which was known as the House of the Afflicted, Empress Menen was praying when she was informed about the liberation of her country on May the 5th, 1941. And that's one of the headlines in front of us. Addis Ababa falls. The Empress is at prayers when good news came to Bath. Today, in this area of the grounds at Fairfield House, there's a sacred garden. And once again, it's a spiritual place where people can go to reflect and remember their loved ones, just as it was used in the time of the Emperor and Empress. This was now a period of many years away from their country, and the emperor began to welcome activities and interests to pass the time, to have that sense of normality as a family, even in very difficult circumstances. At Fairfield House, the emperor was said to excel at table tennis, as you can see from the headline at the top. And this year at Fairfield House, we held our first table tennis tournament, which is going to become an annual thing in commemoration of the emperor's excelling at table tennis whilst he was in exile. We also know about the emperor's reading habits. And once he was able to actually get hold of some books, we know that the emperor read the Bible often and the works of church fathers. Also, leaders such as Abraham Lincoln and Napoleon Haile Selassie said that he studied during this time of exile. He went to see his children and his grandchildren take part in plays locally in Bath. His grandson was in A Midsummer Night's Dream. And from the news article that's in front of us, we learn that the emperor saw his son, Prince Makonnen, play the part of the King of Ethiopia in a nativity play at Bath. We also know that the emperor and empress's pianola was a big part of family life. It was said in news articles to be very worn from much use. This was an item that was returned to Fairfield House, an indigenous item from the time of the emperor and empress, a number of years ago, and it plays again today, especially on our Sunday historical guided tour. It's a lovely part of the tour for people to see. Another part of the emperor's coping with exile was to impose a strict routine and schedule upon himself and his government in exile. And throughout his reign, the emperor was known to sleep only sparingly, but this was also something that he practiced whilst he was at Fairfield House. His day would start at 5 o'clock in the morning in the chapel area, and his day would end at 1 o'clock in the morning. So he'd work a 20-hour day with 4 hours rest. At 7 o'clock in the morning, Emperor Haile Selassie would be heading off on his morning walk towards Bath. And thanks to this late gentleman, Mr. Gerald Walker of Newbridge Road, Bath, we now know that around 7:30 a.m., he would occasionally see the emperor posting his own letters in this postbox on the corner of Partis College. This postbox is entirely unchanged since those days, 86 years ago and more. Mr. Walker, when we went to visit him and record his testimony, he actually gave us letters to post in the post box, and he said he wished he could have posted them himself. He was the former editor of the Bath Chronicle, and his father was also before him. He told us how his parents had been invited to have a private dinner with the Emperor and Empress at Fairfield House, and that when the Emperor returned in 1954, he was one of the local people gathered to cheer at the gates for the Emperor's return arrival to Fairfield. We have recorded his testimony for future generations. Lifting the Emperor's spirits further was the warmth and kindness of the British people, which he said strengthened and nourished him. This warmth was sometimes expressed in poetry, and here are two of these poems of hope from the 1930s. From the Ballads of Bath by W. Gregory Harris, to Bath's royal exile. Haile Selassie, Ethiopia's lord, through meek of mien, thy heart in righteous rage resents the rending of thy heritage. From its true heirs, at the imperious word of one whose arguments were fire and sword, and deadly poison pouring from the sky on victims writhing in agony. Mocked by the pitiless invading horde of fascist zealots lusting for the land, which by divinest right has ever been, since days of Solomon and Sheba's queen, the pride of Judah's lion to command, our English hearts are sharers in the pain of those who mourn an empire's loss in vain. Here in our midst, O lion-hearted friend, we grieve with thee, O Ethiopia's fate, but still thy hope is ours to see the end of all which makes thy kingdom desolate. Nay, we await that certain nemesis which crime deserves and sinners cannot miss. And another poem from Bernard Jolivard. Noble Emperor, 'tis to thee, in respect I bend the knee, for thou, the greatest of thy race, has faced the foeman face to face. Oh, splendid was the mighty stand 'gainst fearful strength of modern land, with poisoned gas, with shot and shell, to sound a Christian nation's knell. The people here of countries four, from John O'Groats to southern shore, the duke, the peasant, rich and poor, have for thee admiration sure. And were they told to lift the glaive, they'd rush ahead in mighty wave, with faces stern and effort strong, to right this vile and frightful wrong. And the travels of Haile Selassie, as it says at the top. In 1938 and 1939, the emperor toured many places in the UK, further raising awareness for his country and asking people to remember Ethiopia and the Ethiopian people in their prayers. The emperor especially loved to visit the Southwest, and this is where a number of his grandchildren in particular were sent to schools. And here you can see in these news reports, Penzance, Cheltenham, Taunton, the emperor visiting Bristol and seeing a film called The Abyssinian March of Time, Bridgewater, Wells, Stogursey, and Hartland in Devon. And just to give you a flavor of the emperor's visits, this is from his visit to Hartland in North Devon, where he was opening a church fete at St. Nectan's Church. The emperor said, "The just cause of my country has not received greater sympathy anywhere than in this country. Why so much sympathy has achieved so little, this is not the place to consider. The fact is that my people are going through a great tribulation. Independence cherished for many years is being cruelly oppressed. In my country, women are escaping, saying, "Where is my husband?" Children are crying, saying, "Where is my mother? Where is my father?" The Almighty and merciful God may bring peace to these afflicted people in his own way. I hope that you will remember my people in your prayers. I would like to finally say that I hope you will have an enjoyable time, and this bazaar that I have a great pleasure in opening will be a success. And as you can see, the Emperor, although he was on these visits across the Southwest and elsewhere in the United Kingdom, you could see that he was never really disconnected from the struggle and the suffering that was going on in Ethiopia. And it's really quite a great contrast between the Emperor's thoughts and his words there and the fun of a local bazaar that he was opening in that time. So you can see that the Emperor, he was using every opportunity to remind people as to what was happening in Ethiopia. And further in the Southwest, the Emperor goes to Street, to Gloucester, to Exeter, where actually outside of Exeter Cathedral, he's in a car accident, and then many people surrounded the car, and once they realized it was Haile Selassie. To Weston-super-Mare, and in Weston-super-Mare, they have a story at the Tropicana swimming pool where the blue plaque is, of Haile Selassie queuing up and refusing to go to the front of the queue and waiting with his children, like an ordinary customer, to go into the Tropicana swimming pool. To Torquay and to Burnham-on-Sea and to many other places. But with Burnham-on-Sea especially, and with the Southwest region in particular, we wonder if the famous legend about a former visitor, Jesus Christ himself as a young boy with his uncle Joseph of Arimathea, would have comforted Haile Selassie to be walking in the legendary footsteps of the young Christ and the early Christian faith in Britain. And it's only in the Southwest where this legend and association with a young Christ and his uncle exists. And it was remembered, especially along the coast of the Southwest in the churches there. And this may have been important to the Emperor or given him some comfort, because His Imperial Majesty, Haile Selassie, the conquering lion of the tribe of Judah, as his official title, but the Lion of Judah, as he was often known, was directly compared to someone in this time who was his greatest inspiration. He who suffered for others and gained an eternal triumph. Whilst in Torquay, Lord Mamhead of Exeter stood opening an event next to the Emperor and said, "A mistake we have made is to preach the Christ of yesterday and the Christ of tomorrow, but not the Christ of today." In Jerusalem, an American newspaper reported that the natives were absolutely startled as they said that Haile Selassie both looked and spoke like Jesus. And in 1938, the Emperor went to London to visit the Albert Hall to give his testimony about his love of the Bible at the Bible Testimony Fellowship. He said, "From early childhood, I was taught to appreciate the Bible, and my love for it increases with time. For my part, I glory in the Bible." And for those that aren't able to see this slide, the headlines say, "The Lion of Judah, the Christ of today. Haile Selassie sends his thanks. And so long as the sacred Book of Solomon is cherished by the ruling house, then the Lion of Judah shall conquer misfortune." And a report when the emperor was helping poor children at Swindon train station, he donated to the children, each of the children that was begging there. And Haile Selassie, one of his messages that was recorded by the journalists, "Remember the weak." In 1939, at the outbreak of World War II, the emperor was watching events very closely from his headquarters in the Westcountry. When Mussolini sides with Hitler and they make it official with the Pact of Steel, the cry went up for Haile Selassie and Ethiopia to be looked upon as an ally and friend, as they always should have been. The emperor had to wait a little longer until 1940, but he left Plymouth Harbor in a flying boat, a top secret operation, and was stationed on the borders of Ethiopia for many months, waiting until combined Ethiopian and British forces were gathered for re-entry. And some of the headlines in front of us are in those moments when the emperor is awaiting to return to his country. And it says, "Haile Selassie is watching events. Selassie, I will lead, and I want justice," says Selassie in events in Bath. And we're going to see a short video now from the moment of the liberation of Ethiopia on May the 5th, 1941. And please note how the narrator so clearly describes Ethiopia's place in history of World War II and how much that has been discredited after.
The strange but proud procession is now nearly in the capital itself. Excitement is rising in a quickening tempo as this African empire writes a page of glorious history. The weird chanting and cheering of Ethiopia reaches a climax at the gates of Addis Ababa as an emperor returns in triumph to his people. Picture to yourself how one day this scene will be enacted again and again. In Czechoslovakia, in Poland, in Holland, Belgium, Norway, Denmark, yes, in France too. And in gallant, glorious Greece, he was the first. Here was the moment of supreme triumph as the emperor was greeted by the general officer commanding in Abyssinia, General Cunningham. Nigerian troops were guard of honor after their victorious campaign. African guns fired a 21-gun salute. This day, 5 years before, Italian troops had marched into this place. The emperor stood on the balcony of the Menelik Palace to speak to his warrior subjects. He spoke of his friendship with Britain. He called for unity to continue the struggle against godless brutality. So ended this moving historic ceremony. So liberty and justice were brought back again into a land that has known only fear and ruthless oppression for 5 terrible years. Crowds return to their homes as the emperor walks again into the great halls of the palace that seem so strange and yet so strangely familiar. He has shown that faith can live through the darkest years. In our dark days, we shall do well to remember the grim ordeal of these simple people, how they endured and how they came through hell to victory.
And it was that day, May the 5th, 1941. It was the day that so many people had dreamt of and prayed for. It was 5 years to the day when the Italians had occupied Addis Ababa, and the emperor chose that day for re-entry into his capital. And here I've noticed we have lots of fives going on, because May is the 5th month, and it was the 5th day, 5 years to the day. And funnily enough, the conquering lion of the tribe of Judah is mentioned in the Bible, in the book of Revelation, Revelation 5, verse 5. After finding out about the exciting news in the chapel of Fairfield House, Empress Menen arranged a party for residents of Bath, and up to 60 people were in attendance. The mayor of Bath toasted the emperor, and we know that the pianola played triumphantly. And some of the headlines in front of us say, "City's delight at the return of the emperor." After 5 years, British guns, Italian shells hail the emperor. Haile Selassie returns to his capital, back to his empire, and the Emperor Selassie thanks Britain. And here in the bottom left, we have a lady called Mrs. Bridget Wakefield, and she's still around today in her 90s. Her parents attended that celebration party held by the Empress. Her father was the Empress's personal doctor during the time of exile, and he visited Fairfield House often. He was even invited to move him and his family to Ethiopia by the Emperor, but he respectfully declined. Bridget herself has fond memories of playing with the Emperor's grandchildren at her home just down the road from Fairfield House, and she kept in touch with them all through the years. During our interview with Bridget, we were able to show her photos of the Empress's party from the newspaper archives, and lo and behold, Bridget immediately pointed out her parents. They're in the top left-hand corner, standing behind Princess Sahai. So it's quite a medical themed photo. As the caption says, Princess Sahai, a member of the nursing staff of Guy's Hospital, was chatting with guests. And over on the top right, we have Mr. Michael Jennings, and he's with Fisiha, one of our Ethiopian directors at Fairfield House. And I should mention Pauline as well, who has her arm around Bridget. Pauline is the manager of Bemska and also a director of Fairfield House. And Mr. Michael Jennings, he's a resident of Empress Menen Gardens, which is right next to Fairfield House. And he can remember the emperor coming to his school when he was a young man and meeting him. And his late wife, he told us, was honored by the emperor as a nurse in 1954. And when he told us this while we were interviewing him, we were able to go and get a photo of that occasion with the emperor visiting the Bath and Wessex Orthopedic Hospital. And straight away, he said, "There she is." And this was another lovely moment, collecting these precious testimonies. And these are so important to get and preserve for future generations. After the war, the emperor set to rebuilding his country. And he had help from friends that he had made during his time in Britain. And one of those friends was Miss Sylvia Pankhurst, the famous suffragette and anti-colonial campaigner. Sylvia would travel to Bath to assist Haile Selassie during the years of exile often. And we know from the emperor's autobiography that she helped him make a broadcast to the world from Fairfield House. After the war, Sylvia campaigned to have Ethiopia's period of distress recognized as part of World War II. She was decorated as a war hero for Ethiopia and moved there in 1950 to help with Ethiopian development. She died there in 1960 and left a great legacy in Ethiopia. And the emperor said that he will always consider her to be an honorary Ethiopian. In 1954, the emperor made a celebrated return visit to Britain, and it was a stark contrast to his arrival previously as a refugee. In London, the emperor received a royal welcome and was entertained at Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, 10 Downing Street, and in the City of London. And here you can see a picture of Winston Churchill bowing his head down low to the Ethiopian emperor in the door of 10 Downing Street. And Winston Churchill had a nickname for Haile Selassie because he was so resilient during those years of World War II. He called him Mr. John Strong. Also noteworthy is that during the emperor's time in London, His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie entertained Queen Elizabeth II and guests at the Ethiopian embassy at Prince's Gate. And this was very rare for the monarch of Great Britain to leave the territory in her own country. And this was a chivalrous move by the emperor to invite Queen Elizabeth II. And it also emphasized Ethiopia's independent status. Before his trip to Britain, journalists asked Emperor Haile Selassie what he is most looking forward to in Britain. His answer was his home, Fairfield House, and the emperor also added, "I will always look upon the Westcountry as my second home." And when Haile Selassie returned to Ethiopia after the war, he named a palace Fairfield House. And it's reported in Keith Bauer's book, Imperial Exile, that in the early days, the emperor even had a neon sign with the name Fairfield House because he was so proud to show people this connection to the city of Bath. A small crowd had gathered outside the gates of the emperor's home, including Mr. Walker, who we met before. And journalists were visiting the house, and it was buzzing with activity getting ready for the emperor's return visit in October 1954. The gardeners had been hard at work in the garden from 7 o'clock in the morning each morning, it was reported. And the roses were blooming, as the headline says there. And the emperor's lawn was mowed half an hour before his return visit. Inside Fairfield House, the emperor's housekeeper had brought out all the family furniture out of storage, and great care was taken to put it back as it was for the time of exile, as the emperor would remember it. Because in that period from 1943 up to 1954, Fairfield House during World War II and afterwards has served as an orphanage for children who had lost their parents and their homes during World War II. In the emperor's orchard, the Allington Pippin's apple tree, and those are Allington Pippin's apples down at the bottom of my slide, had all its apples wrapped up. And it was reported that nobody was able to pick them before Haile Selassie because it was remembered how much he enjoyed these apples during the time of exile. The emperor stayed at his home once again for the best part of a week, and even cancelled arrangements to rest more at Fairfield House. In 1958, the emperor gave his home to the city of Bath for the good of the aged. And this is still Fairfield's primary purpose today, with Bath Ethnic Minority Senior Citizens Association, or BEMSCA, serving the elderly ethnic minorities of Bath for the last 29 years. The house also has more aspects to it as a diverse community hub, and now also as a heritage visitor attraction. And it's a very special place, Fairfield House, to the Rastafari community, where it's the most sacred ground in the United Kingdom for the Rastafari community, the Ethiopian community, who will come to Fairfield House to celebrate their special days and events, and the local people of Bath who use the building, and many other people across the world, many who may be tuned in today. And we have different events throughout the year with our communities, and we have also developed a museum and other areas of the house for visitors, and we open to the public currently on Sundays, and I would really recommend for all to visit and learn more about this important history. And we are really interested at Fairfield House, while it is still possible, to record more of the testimonies that have made up this presentation with the elderly, to be preserved for future generations in the house. If you know someone who might have memories of Emperor Haile Selassie, his family, and his time in this country, do get in contact with us via our website, fairfieldhousebath.co.uk. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ras Benji. That's fantastic. I love the details and the stories, and I learned new things there. That was absolutely brilliant. So I'm gonna start by just asking a few questions, and then we'll open it up to any questions and comments from the audience. I'm sure there'll be plenty. You start, description yourself as a Rastafari historian, and it'd be good to explore that identity. When did you start your journey with researching this history? And was there a moment when you started to approach it as a historian beyond your personal interest and connection? How describe that for us, that journey?
Yeah. Well, for me, this journey all started when I was about 16, 17. First, it all connected with Bob Marley, my experiences of racism, and Emperor Haile Selassie's words. So I really started looking up in that time, the emperor. But this was turbocharged when I went to university, because I had all these new skills to do with research. So although I was studying law, I kind of put those new skills into looking into my passion. And then there was a defining moment for me on the history side. There was other defining moments to me on the faith side, but on the history side, a defining moment for me was in 2016, after I had been to Ethiopia, because there was a play brought back into London's West End, and it was based on a book by Ryszard Kapuscinski, and the book's called The Emperor Downfall of the Autocrat. And in this book, it's highly defamatory of the emperor, and Prince Emperor Haile Selassie has called it literary colonialism. And when this came back, I was trying to raise awareness to people that how wrong this is, And then, it wasn't landing with everyone. I don't think people quite understood exactly how important it was to resist and show some sort of resistance on the emperor's side and for Ethiopia's side. So I went to the theatre and protested for 3 weeks every evening, and I was joined by others along the way. And in that, you needed a very strong historical based argument to cope with the propaganda that the people had seen coming out of the play. So that made me have that discipline as a historian to actually stand just in the truth, and that is enough to defend the emperor and Ethiopia's glorious history.
I mean, yeah, the Kapitschki protests. I remember when that was happening, and that's a powerful piece of work, and it might be good to explore that a little bit later, because I know that's an area that's really passionate to you, and that's an ongoing campaign, isn't it?
I could believe it could come back again. So maybe it'll be for another generation to be protesting it as well by that time. But definitely more exploration. And there's been other books on Kapuscinski and his writings and why they were falsified and fictionalized. But they persist. It's a Penguin classic. It's one of the only books you can find about Emperor Haile Selassie in Bath, unless you go to Fairfield House.
Mm-hmm. And you want to see that in the fiction section rather than the history section?
That would be a momentous occasion, a worldwide moving of Ryszard Kapuscinski to the fiction section.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, long range that campaign, so thanks you for your work in that. What has most surprised you in your discoveries of this history, and also about the emperor himself? Emperor's got this reputation, most I guess commonly associated with the Rastafari movement. You might want to explain that for people in the audience that don't understand or know that connection. So yeah, getting to understand the emperor as a man, as a politician, family man, spiritual man, etc. And also in this history in connection with, Bath and the UK, which you also touched on. What's been some of the surprises for you?
When you immerse yourself in this period of history in the 1930s, I think the big things that speak are the anxiety and the pain. That's what's coming around, because there's a big anxiety in the newspaper reports and the letters that people are writing in about a global conflict. And I use the term now quite openly, like His Majesty suffering from post-traumatic stress when he came to Bath and in that period, because he didn't expect to leave his country. He wanted to die on the battlefield. So he was being thrown into a path that he didn't plan for. So this was very shocking to him. And the emperor also, on the mental health side of things, the emperor actually confided in journalists, in more than one journalist, that he considered taking his own life. So that's how difficult things were for Haile Selassie. So those are really the time. And Fairfield is today as a place of celebration, and it was in 1954, the emperor's return visit, and for the emperor's legacy. But you have to remember sometimes, like, the suffering and how traumatic that was.
Really interesting. And yeah, again, there's lots of what you just talked about there, stories and histories about Haile Selassie that hasn't been talked about publicly before, and even that reluctance to talk about those sort of things publicly. So thanks for unearthing this. And I remember doing my own research about Haile Selassie, when I was making films, etc. Then I suddenly come up to the realization, what if I find out something I don't want to see? Do you know what I mean? In terms of controversial, and he is a figure in terms of different people have different opinions and things like that. How have you dealt with those types of histories and and reports about him, and also in reports written in those times, in terms of the tone and the sources from your research? You know, have they been written about in a particular colonial voice, different than other European leaders, for example? Do you see any differences in how Haile Selassie has been dealt with in historical records, different from other world leaders of the time?
Well, firstly, just because you just almost mentioned it there, I just have to mention Footsteps of the Emperor, because seeing that documentary and your work there, and it's very much the same, interviewing the elderly that are around in that time, and they're still around. You know, there's still people that are around that have these really important and clear, very clear testimonies about what happened in that time. And that was a really inspirational and very moving documentary for me to watch. So just to big up, you know, and it's an honor to be in the same, like, be on the same, working on the same topic with that as the standard. And as a historian, with that as the standard, it's, you know, it's very important, it's very local, it's very balanced, because either, you know, Ethiopia is like a microcosm of human civilization. They've got so many different ethnicities, so many different languages, so many different cultures, different religious practices. So people will have different views. But Emperor Haile Selassie, you'll find when you get to the source that he was very embracing of these differences. And he had clear, almost like a blueprint for us to get through them in the modern world. And nothing's changed, because the emperor's teachings have only become more potent, you know, until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior, finally and permanently discredited and abandoned. All human beings are equal and precisely the same. We must overcome our differences, you know, become members of a new race. This is the teachings from the emperor. And then with the reports of the time and that colonial attitude that existed, which definitely did exist, you find it most shocking, I think, in some of the books of the time about the emperor. Because the newspapers were more populist, they had to go for the sympathy approach. So they're going with the attitude of the people, and they're seeing hundreds of people, you know, protesting about it, or there to celebrate the emperor and to cheer him, even though it's not been called as a state visit. So the tone in the newspapers often is very sympathetic, and that especially in the local Bath ones, even when they're having to call him the ex-emperor, you know, and things like that, the actual articles themselves tend to always be that more human understanding. And because they've been introduced to him personally, and they see him going around, they're not able to demonize him perhaps in the same way that they would want to in the time. And then to add to that is that I think that Haile Selassie and the Ethiopian nobles, they entirely flip the racist paradigm and the propaganda of that 20th century on its head, because even in the 1920s, Haile Selassie and the Ethiopian nobles, or Rastafari and the Ethiopian nobles, were so obviously showing people in their trips to Europe that they were very dignified, highly educated, and this completely blew to pieces the kind of ideas that were being thrown out there about barbaric Africa, to have this ancient civilization with much older kings than this nation, you know, that so values in that time, especially its monarchy, you know. So this Haile Selassie flipped these things on their head, and that was like a thing repeatedly. And I think if we still zoom in, he still changes things to, you know, what sometimes, for example, in the 80s or 90s, the conceptions of Haile Selassie were.
Thank you, really interesting. Thanks for that. I'm going to go to questions now from audiences. Iona Keane writes, "Hi Ras Benji, thanks you so much for a fascinating talk. Such a crucial and yet not well known enough part of Bath's heritage, and indeed our national and international heritage. I'd love to see some heritage funding injected into Fairfield House to tell the Emperor's story and the important role the trust plays today for the Rastafarian community and beyond. Have you ever applied for national trust heritage?" Talking about the mechanisms of, so I guess, do you want to illuminate a little bit about, yeah, Fairfield House today, how it's managed, who manages it? Do you know what I mean? So if you talk a little bit about that, those practicalities.
So in 2019, we formed a community interest company, Fairfield House Bar CIC, and this is representing the different communities that I mentioned in the presentation. And we very recently, just 2 weekends ago, signed a lease for Fairfield House, a short lease that's going to lead to a longer lease. And this takes away all the anxiety that there's been over the years about the building being lost. And on the board of Fairfield House, we have people, I have to mention especially Celia. She's done tremendous work in the museums and has really expertise in the heritage sector. And she's also applies for a lot and has been able to get a lot of fundraising for Fairfield House. So you can bet your bottom dollar that if there's something to apply for, or if you know anything that Fairfield should apply for, do send it to the CIC. But we definitely are going to be trying to get this funding so that the story can be told, so that the house can be restored, and so that we can just build on this amazing, magical place that we have.
Mm-hmm. I mean, what are the future plans for people that don't know? I mean, you mentioned a bit about what you can see there. What's the kind of the future direction kind of looking like?
Well, part of us taking on this lease is to approve our business plan, which is already in action. And we have local socially minded organizations that are headquartered at Fairfield House. So we have like Headway, the Brain Injury Association, 3SG, which is the third sector charity group, First Impressions that help women that are out of work get back into the workforce, the art cohort, and others that are based at Fairfield House and renting rooms, because the Emperor, he said, it has many rooms and it's very chilly, but it's very warm today, and we've got many rooms, so we're putting them to good use for that community, local, organizational space. And then opening to the public was a massive step, because I think whenever I watch Footsteps of the Emperor, something always jumps out at me, but most recently it's that bit at the end with Pauline, and she's saying there's nothing to see in the house, you know, but everyone still comes here from all across the world. And like now, more than 20 years later, to see those things that we have to see in the house, you know, that you can come and experience and kind of jump into the history. You know, that's the journey. And I think that there'll be more of that in future, as well as keeping that strong community magic that we have there, the special nature of the house, and the services that the elderly use it for, because for them, it's just a home from home.
Yeah. No, brilliant. I'm going to go to a question now from David Evans. So many thanks for an interesting presentation. So the light's gone off in the office as one of these timer lights. Many thanks for interesting presentation. You portray a very positive response from local people to Haile Selassie and his family in Bath. Is there any evidence that they experienced any racism as well?
I think they would have experienced some. I think it would be unlikely if they didn't have some kind of attitudes. And sometimes they might have been just, you know, someone could have commented and said, well, it should be Italy's country, Ethiopia, you know, it's that infusion of the colonial attitude with the racism, and how they're framing the emperor and his place in the country, or Ethiopia's history as not being worthy to defend herself and her sovereignty. So they definitely did. I haven't seen in the news reports, in particular in the newspaper archives, a report about the Ethiopian royal family experiencing racism. But I think probably like going to school for the emperor's grandchildren across the southwest and across England entirely, I think that their experience would have been very different in terms of that raw experience of, you know, through children, the ignorance and racist comments and all those sorts of things. So I think that would definitely be true of the time also.
Yeah. I have to say that from the research I've done, I haven't seen any documented evidence of any racism as well. There's the story of, I think it's Princess Tashai was there at a function and she was dancing with a young white boy at this, and one of the emperor's you know, entourage advisors came up to Haile Selassie saying this is an outrage, and you know, she's dancing, and the Haile Selassie was like, let her dance, let her enjoy herself, she's not doing anything wrong, you know. So which is, yeah, very refreshing and enlightening to hear, really, his attitudes towards that kind of thing.
Yeah, that was Dr. Malaku Bayen who went rushing off, and he generally was very protective of the emperor and his family. You know, he was on the battlefield next to the emperor, and when they were stationed in a cave, there was people that had been wounded in the war, and they were being brought for treatment next to the emperor, with Dr. Bayen just working furiously on them. And then later in exile, in those early years before he went to the United States from Bath, Dr. Bayen, I think he was somewhere on the south coast, and he was in a rowing boat with the emperor's children, and he said it was too choppy, it was too rough, so he had to get them back in because he was responsible for them. So he's very protective, and that's his spirit.
Yeah. You might be of interest to the audience here in the sense that it's being a history context event, because we've got the library and the study area at Fairfield. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and some of the collections that you got there and how that might be used in the future?
Yeah, so I think that this is our university partnerships are really important, and we're looking to extend those at Fairfield House. So any universities that would like to form cultural educational partnerships with us, do get in contact. And this area, the Abyssinia crisis, as they call it, has recently gone into the GCSE curriculum. So on the tours, quite often we'll get GCSE students also becoming to be very interested in this area of 20th century history. So it's undoubtedly important, and you know, it's the what happened in the century before. It's absolutely crucial and one of the undoubted triggers to World War II. So one of the really exciting things that we have in the library is that Sylvia Pankhurst's son, a man that was known as Dr. Richard Pankhurst, and he was the founder of the Ethiopian Institute of History, and he lived in Ethiopia. And when he passed away, his daughter, Dr. Helen Pankhurst, she got in contact with us and donated his English Ethiopian book collection. His whole office we cleared out, we were instructed to clear out and take to Fairfield House. So this is one of the very exciting resources that just represents a whole treasure trove of things to uncover in the future. Sometimes I think about the library, I think I want to keep my distance a little bit, because if I get sucked in, I'm never leaving. You know, that's how it feels for me in the Fairfield House Library. But we also have another collection from Triscott Rond from Holland, and he's given on loan many items in Fairfield House and books, and it's amazing, you know, such from the 1930s, and in that period of the Ethiopian War, we have some top resources to study this subject. And also from the Richard Pankhurst collection, it's a lot focused also in the period after Haile Selassie's reign and the different ethnic groups in Ethiopia. So I think that for the future, that's very important also.
No, brilliant. Can we talk a little bit about the archive, about, you know, is there an archive that's developing and whether it's accessible? And I guess it's through that same space. How do we deal with archive and these collections, the audio that you're collecting, etc., etc.? You know, how is that being managed, or what's the ambition for those kind of resources?
So we're totally not there yet. this would be going into a Google Drive when we collect these testimonies from elders, for example, or any event in the modern history of the house. These are just going away into a Google Drive. Sometimes they're going out online on our social media or other sources, their website. But this needs to be improved. And when you're thinking about the benefits, because His Majesty said we have to use the benefits of modern technology. So when you think about what's possible, and for a Fairfield House archive for the last 86 years, and before that up to 1850, the first resident of Mrs. Campbell Wright, to today, that has so much potency for that to be a fantastic resource. And you think about, for example, people studying the Rastafari movement in Britain, like for them to be able to access the modern Fairfield House archive, and would be crucial part of their research. So there's infinite potential, and we need help on that.
Yeah. But I was going to mention there seems to be this growing interest of scholars, researching Rastafari and Haile Selassie and Ethiopian British connections. Sis Hilda Cap is in the audience, I see, doing her PhD research in this area. Elima Gray likewise doing her PhD, and do you know what I mean? So it's really interesting. I think, Fairfield House is going to increasingly become important for this new generation of scholars unearthing these new eras of this history. So no, fascinating area, really. So thank you. I don't know if we've got any additional questions. Dr. Rose Wallace has also mentioned that there's definitely interest with UWE history partnering with Fairfield House. So that would be, exciting development. So that would be
tremendously exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if there's any other questions. She's just put in the chat archive project. So I guess just to finish off, really, I'm not sure what time we're due to wrap up, but so what's your personal ambitions as a historian? I know we've talked a bit about the Pinchley kind of work, but where are you taking this research, and how are you looking to develop it and get it out there? So what's your personal direction as yourself as a historian?
As a historian, and also interwoven with my faith as Rastafari, because I think that one work that I see on my shoulders to really complete personally, away from my works at Fairfield House, is a body of work addressing these different things that are said about Haile Selassie, and to show the things that I've uncovered that may say different things. So that's a historical book, and every time I sit down to do it, I go through different phases, but the pressure and the overwhelming task of I know that this is what I would consider my life work is there. So I've also been working on other things, and when I finish my day at Fairfield House, usually totally blissful, but sometimes quite stressful, I like to go into some escapism. So I'm also writing a novel about Fairfield House. So one day we might see these things. And then also I've done a lot of work on areas relating to Marcus Garvey, actually, with his son visiting tomorrow. But Marcus Garvey, the Ethiopian World Federation, Dr. Bayen, done a lot of research in that area and that period. So I would definitely cover that area. When we did the Freedom in the City Festival, I presented the mystical connections between Bath and Ethiopia. But what is actually underlying that is the ancient relationship between Ethiopia and Britain, and the biblical relationship. So that's another area that I'd like to explore also. And just whatever the Almighty wants me to do, I'm gonna get to work on it in that time.
Yeah, well, thank you, and all strength to you in your work and future work. Sounds fantastic. So we'll look out for that and your novel and your work, fantastic work. So thank you again. Fascinating talk. and thanks for sharing. So
Thank you so much.
So over to Dr. Rose Wallace just to close the event. So
can I just join Sean in thanking you so much, Ras Benji? That was amazing. I've engaged with the house. I've been on your fabulous tours. I've lived right next to it for a large part of my life, and there was so much more in there, and that takes that local story to its international kind of extent. It's so rich. Please write the book, all of them. So thank you, enormous thanks. That was absolutely brilliant. I hope our audience enjoyed it. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Please do come back next month. Our next talk is on the 17th of November, same time, 6:30. And next time it will be our very dear colleague from the Regional History Centre, our director no less, Steve Paul, talking about the storming, burning and liberation of Bristol's new jail in the Reform riots of 1831. So I hope you can join us then. Karen, I think, has put wonderful links to that in the chat, so do please take a moment to look at those, and please also fill out the feedback form for us as well. And we'll see you next month. Thank you again to Ras Benji and to Sean as well for chairing an absolutely brilliant talk and a wonderful start to our programme. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.